Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews. I'm Tracy Phillips, and today I'm interviewing Kathleen Donnelly. Kathleen is the award-winning author of the National Forest Canine Mystery Series. She has a BA in journalism from Colorado State University and formerly wrote for the Berthoud Weekly Surveyor, where she won a Colorado Press Award. Donnelly has been a handler for Sherlock Hound's Detection Canines, a Colorado-based narcotics canine company, since 2005. Enjoying the work in partnership with the dogs, in 2010, Kathleen became a part owner of the company, and she loves crafting realism from her dog handling experience into her fictional stories. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be with you.
I'm so excited to talk about Killer Secrets. It was such a fast, fun read, and so I learned a lot.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Yay.
Yeah. So you are a canine dog trainer, correct? And I want you to tell viewers a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. So Sherlock Hound's Detection Canines is a private narcotics dog business. Our goal is to help keep schools safe. That's our main goal. We also work a couple private businesses every now and then, but mainly in the schools. And our dogs are trained to find drugs, alcohol, and gunpowder. And because we work in the schools, we have non-intimidating looking dogs. So they don't look like Juniper, who's on the poster behind me. They are labs. They are lovable and goofy and love kids and can be petted as well as do their jobs. So it makes it a lot of fun to go into schools, keep them safe, interact with the kids, and see the joy the dogs can bring to their day.
Do you start training them as puppies, or how old are they when you get them?
So we start training them when they're about a year old. Now, once in a while, you do hear about some training as a puppy. Our Boulder County Sheriff's Office, which is the county just south of us, just recently acquired a bloodhound puppy, and he's now no longer a puppy. I think he's a year to a year and a half old, and he's going through certification in his training. That's kind of unusual because sometimes as puppies, you can't tell if they're going to have the right characteristics and what you need. So we like to take them on at about a year old. They're ready to go into training. We can test them out. Usually they're very high energy, hard to live with dogs. And so it's great to get them that job. Most of ours are rescues. I should add that too. We find a lot at rescues. So
Oh,
I love
that's really
that.
cool. I really like that. How much schooling do they need before they're put into the field?
Our dogs are what we call single purpose dogs. So that just means they're trained to do one thing only, which in this case is find drugs, alcohol, and gunpowder. So scent discrimination. So our dogs, it only takes about 3 to 4 months and they're ready to start working. I would say when I get a dog out of training, it still takes about a year before I feel like I've really bonded and know that dog. And that's been something that's been fun to explore in the fiction books too, is to have my protagonist, Maya, learning the ins and outs and the quirks of her canine, Juniper. But dual purpose dogs like Juniper, which means they do more than one job. So they might find narcotics, they might find bombs, they might track criminals, apprehend, which is the polite way of saying they're going to bite someone, and or they might find evidence. Any of those jobs, that takes longer if they're going to have more than one job. I'd say the training can take up to 1 year, just depending on what that dog is going to do.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love dogs too. So, um, but and Maya Thompson is your protagonist, and she's a canine handler for the National Forest Service.
Mhm.
And she mentions in the book a few times about working with Juniper. Do they train? Do do the dog handlers keep the training going?
Yes, we do. So we believe in training just about every single day, doing something. And training, you have to keep in mind, is fun for the dogs. It's
Yeah.
playtime for the dogs. So it might be as simple as, like, I have Kongs that are scented with alcohol. I go out and hide them in the yard, turn them loose, they go find it. And they're just like, oh, we're just going to play and have fun. If I find this scent, I can play with it, and it's just fun to watch them. So that might be a training session, or it could be more intense where I go out and hide specific things. I might do what I call proofing. And proofing is where if we think the dog has, say, alerted on something they shouldn't have, beef jerky is a big one for this. If I feel like the dog is alerted on something like that, I'll buy beef jerky, I'll put it out with all the training, and I'll make sure they are alerting on the correct thing. And I will say they've always shown me that they are alerting on the correct things, but beef jerky does distract them a little bit. So we work on that.
Yeah.
Can you blame them? I mean, it's how hard is that?
Right. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So Killer Secrets is the third book in your series?
Third book. Yep, that's
Third
correct.
book, and it is absolutely a gripping and addictive mystery. It opens with an avalanche. And so, Kathleen, can you set up this story for readers?
Sure. So in this story, we've already talked a little bit about my protagonist, Maya, being a Forest Service law enforcement officer, and her canine, Juniper. They receive a phone call that an avalanche had been triggered in the backcountry by two snowboarders. And when that avalanche was triggered, they discovered the dumping grounds of a serial killer. So Maya and Juniper have to head out to investigate. While they're investigating, they learn they don't really know who they can trust, even within law enforcement. And there's some other things going on with her personally, with her and her love interest, Josh. And so it's just it was a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And so Maya and her boyfriend Josh, did they meet in the beginning of the series?
They do. So in the first book, Chasing Justice, that's where they meet. And it's been fun to develop that relationship and see where it's gone. When I first started writing the book, however, millions of drafts ago, I wasn't certain if they were going to get together. And by the time I got to the draft that Chasing Justice became, they were definitely meant to be together. But it was fun to write their story because when they meet, Maya isn't too certain she even likes Josh. So
Yeah. So you touch on some really important issues in Killer Secrets. One is the prevalence of fentanyl laced drugs. How and how extremely dangerous they are. So you use scented props for training the dogs. Obviously, you don't want them training on the actual thing, right?
right.
So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I'll start with the training piece. We train on what we call pseudo drugs. We don't have the real drugs for several reasons. One, like you mentioned, now drugs have become so convoluted with different chemicals. We want to make sure with a pseudo drug, we know we're 100% training on the scent we need them to find. So it's not like meth where there might be bleach or something like that added in. So it's very pure. This is the scent of meth. This is what I need you to find. It's also a lot safer for the dogs in the
Right.
long run. They make all sorts of like pseudo heroin, pseudo cocaine, pseudo marijuana. I mean, pseudo meth. You can find it just about any narcotic you need to train on, you can find in a pseudo drug. So the other thing is the DEA years ago, before I think the drugs got so convoluted. I mean, I think obviously bad things are always put into drugs, but it seems like it's become worse. So the DEA used to give a license to like our trainer to use, he could check drugs out of evidence, so to speak. So you could train on the real thing. But we never had that license. It's very hard to get. It's obviously very regulated. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, is not going to just let anyone have that kind of license. So that was the other reason we chose pseudo drugs. As far as the fentanyl, it has become a big issue. I now carry Narcan on me for myself and the dogs. So it's a nasal injection. You just don't know when you're going to run across it. In my line of work, I know there was at least once where we knew that's what we were looking for. And we had Narcan, we had people with us ready to administer it if need be. And I tell you what, those dogs alerted, and confused him that day, because usually you wait and praise him up and tell him what a good job. But that day when they sat, I just pulled him away from it as fast as I could, because it is so very dangerous. If a breeze picks up or something blows in your face, it can affect you. It can shut down your whole system, stop breathing, and Narcan is your only hope to bring yourself back from that. And even after a dose of Narcan, you still have to go to the ER. The dog would still need to go to their emergency room, and everyone would have to be monitored. So it is very dangerous.
Yeah,
Very,
which
very
brings me
dangerous.
to another question. In your book, in Killer Secrets, the serial killer, the murderer, is using a very unique method of torturing and killing his victims.
Yes, I don't know when this idea came to mind, but I thought, well, I think it was as I learned more about Narcan, as I was learning more about the fact that you can be administered Narcan and relapse, and then you need another one. I thought, well, what if someone did that deliberately? What if they were deliberately ODing someone, bringing them back just to mess with them? And of course, that's very sick and twisted, which is why it's the serial killer who has to do that.
Yeah, yikes.
Yeah. So you hope he got his math right if you're the victim as he brings you
Right,
back. Yeah.
exactly. And so in this book, they also need, because he has killed a lot of people and the avalanche turns over these bodies. They also use Juniper to find the human remains, which is a HRD training, right?
It is. Yeah, we call them HRD dogs or human remain dogs. You might hear it called cadaver dogs. I mean, it's same thing. I think just a lot of canine handlers, we just say, we like our acronyms. We just say HR dogs, and you know what you're talking about. So in real life, I was talking to a handler who works, she has an HRD dog for Boulder County. And she said sometimes the law enforcement dogs, they're only supposed to track live scent, but she said they have had them find deceased victims. So I did go ahead and add that in, but usually the police dogs are more trained to go for the live scent, and it's a specialized dog who comes in because our body odor changes when we pass away.
Yeah.
So those dogs are specifically trained on what we smell like after someone is deceased, and they find that. And they're amazing. It's so fascinating. So many storylines for mystery writers. You know, there's dogs that have been used to find graves and all sorts of things that, you know, if there was a burial grounds, they kind of know where it is. They're not 100% certain. The dogs can come in and find those remains, things like that.
Yeah, wow. So you've already told me that some canines have specialties, and Juniper does the human detective remains, but she's also getting trained in the narcotic sense too, right? I love Juniper as a character. She was so much fun, and I love the way Maya worked with her too, and treated her like a, you know, like a pet in a way, but not quite like a pet.
Yeah.
Um, so another theme that you develop in this book has to do with alcoholism. And so what made you decide to give that particular trait to your characters?
Yeah, I went back and forth on it, and I think it came down to Maya is a Marine veteran who deals with PTSD. Josh is a veteran of the police force. He also deals with some PTSD. And I think that often can lead to alcoholism or drug use. I didn't want to have my characters using drugs because it would be much harder. I think you can function better usually. I mean, I want to be careful how I say that, but I think people can still work and then go home at night and drink heavily, where it's harder with drug use. So I went down the road of alcoholism versus drug addiction, but it's a problem both with veterans coming home and dealing with PTSD. And it's also a problem in law enforcement. And it's because they see so many things, so many traumatic things. I heard a statistic once that the average person might see 3 or 4 very traumatic events in their lifetime. and that in the career of a law enforcement officer, they're going to see anywhere from like 800 to 1,000 traumatic events. So it's just that much stronger. And so I think just bringing to life that it's important for people to feel like they can start reaching out and getting help, that they're not alone, that this is a common problem among obviously many people outside even military and law enforcement, but PTSD does bring around the use of drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. So I just thought it was a piece I wanted to add, and I wanted to show their steps towards recovery and sobriety throughout the books too.
Yeah. Do you cover some of that more in the first books?
Yes, and Chasing Justice, when we meet Maya, she's kind of at the height of her alcoholism. She hasn't quite hit rock bottom. And when she receives Juniper to handle, that's her first turning point of, you can't go home and drink heavily at night and have a working dog in the house and not expect your house to get torn up, for one. And for two, she wanted to be a good handler for the dog, or a great handler. And then as she meets Josh in Chasing Justice, he's already found sobriety and he recognizes the signs and he helps her towards that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Weather is another key player in your book. Because you have the avalanche at the beginning, and then there's still like heavy snowfall is coming. And so let's talk about like using weather as almost like a setting or another character in a way.
Yeah, I had so much fun doing that. I love the mountains growing up here. To me, they almost all have their own personality. I mean, they're so beautiful. They can be dangerous. They can be stunning. I mean, all these different things. And the weather in the mountains can change on a dime. And anyone who's lived in the mountains, and I know you have, Tracy, you know what it's like. It's, the day can start out clear and then a thunderstorm moves in. Or in the case of Killer Secrets, we have this avalanche and then we have this snowstorm coming in to dump more snow, which is a key part of avalanches, is that we get huge snowfall. I mean, this just happened. We had a huge snowstorm a couple of weeks ago. Then it got very warm, and now we just had another big snowstorm, and it creates really unstable layers of snow. And so it was a lot of fun. And I almost sort of felt like the mountains and the weather helped bring justice to the victims of this serial killer. So it was sort of a way of the mountains saying, here you go, here's the victims, solve the crime. And
Yeah.
it's just a fun way to think of them. So
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask is if you're incorporating like the effects of global warming in your books, how
I
that's really affecting the weather some.
I did. Not so much in the first two, not so much in Chasing Justice and Hunting the Truth, but in Killer Secrets, I do bring it in. And part of that was researching the avalanches. I found it so fascinating to find out that we all know snowflakes. I mean, we learned this in elementary school. They're all different shapes. But what happens is they're like a little jigsaw puzzle, and they bind together. And so that's what all those little shapes do. And it keeps it stable, actually. So when you get all the millions of flakes, it keeps these layers stable. Well, as we get warmer weather and melting, then those edges, so to speak, start melting and they don't hold together anymore. And so they feel like there's been more and more avalanches triggered. And I will say in the last month to month and a half, we've had a major highway closed twice from avalanches. And luckily no one was caught in them, but they came down and went across the road, closed down this whole mountain pass to a ski area. And so, yeah, they feel like global warming is contributing to, and climate change is contributing to more avalanches, along with more and more people trying to escape to the backcountry and utilize these areas where there's not, the ski areas here in Colorado, the commercial ones, you might have a lot of people on the slopes, but you go out to the backcountry and you might have a whole mountainside to yourself. So there's kind of a debate. Is it climate change? Is it just more people going out in the backcountry? I feel like it's probably both. And so I brought that into this book. When I've learned that, I found it so fascinating and
Yeah,
decided
but
I'd go
it's
ahead and
hard to
bring
get
that
to
in.
those places where they're skiing. I mean, I've
It
heard of them
is.
doing like helicopter drops or whatever,
Mhm.
and but they have to hike for days to get to those places, don't they?
It depends on where you go. Some of them are easier to access than others. So some of them are actually fairly close to the road. You just kind of have to know where you're going. And for Killer Secrets, I made it a little closer to the road just so we didn't, have a day of hiking in the book. So
Yeah.
you're right. Some people camp out, some people hike in, some people helicopter in, some people snowmobile in. There's a lot of different ways to access those areas.
Right. Yeah. So, clearly you draw on a lot of your background with training dogs and horses too.
Mhm.
In your bio, I found out that you train horses as well.
I do. So when I got out of college, I started training horses. I really enjoy it, and I don't do that anymore. I once I found the dog work, I really got into that. But I still give some riding lessons, and I still
Yeah.
have my own horse. And horses will always be a part of my life. I love them
Yeah.
very much.
Western saddle, I guess, or
No, so
English.
actually, me personally, I do English riding. I do dressage, and I did some eventing growing up. For Killer Secrets, the little mare in there is a quarter horse and Western, more Western. Yeah.
Okay. It was my
Yeah.
daughter was an eventer too.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Um, so do you have a canine who inspired Juniper, the character?
I think there wasn't just one, but we would go down to our trainers in Oklahoma. And when we train, he'd pull out the dogs he had in training for law enforcement. And I'd say about 90% of them were Malinois. He also had some German Shepherds. He also had a giant black Schnauzer. Let me tell you what, grumpy dog, grumpiest dog I've ever met. He was so funny. I don't know if that's typical for the breed or if it was just that dog, but he was great. But the Malinois were so much fun to watch. They had a little different personality where I called the Schnauzer grumpy. And if there's any Schnauzer people out there, I don't want to offend anyone. Like I said, it could just be this dog. But the Malinois all had a sense of humor. You could just tell. They thought they were so funny. Even getting the toys back from them, and I have this in the book a little bit too. They'd be sitting there squeaking their toy, and our trainer would try to get them back, and they just kind of look at him like, "Well, try." see if you can. So I just fell in love with them. He had probably the last one I saw was just a really cool dog, a male dog heading to police work, and I just thought this is the dog I want to have in my book. So
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Do you have a dog?
I have the two working dogs. I don't have any personal pets, but I have the
Okay.
two. So I have a black lab named Boomer and a yellow lab named Willow, although they are both heading towards retirement. And
Aw.
so at the end of this school year, they will become pets.
Cool. Do they make good pets then?
It's good to know as a handler, I understand their training, and there's just some house rules. Like we teach them to get up on things to check and search. And so things like the couches, or you just kind of accept they're probably going to get up on them.
Yeah.
And after all these years, I don't try to change that. So for me, it's pretty easy, but they don't have normal house rules. Like there are definitely people who are like, I can't believe you let your dog do that. And I'm like, well, I trained them to do that. And
Yeah.
now they're retired and they still can. So yeah.
That's great. So here's a random question. Which is harder, writing the first or the last sentence?
That is such a great question. And I think the first one, like you write that first sentence and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have 79,990 more words to go. And I always think of the movie Funny Farm. I don't know if you've ever seen that with Chevy Chase. And he's a writer and he gets all excited and he sits down and writes chapter 1. And then you can just tell time goes by at that blank screen. So once I get going on a manuscript and once I'm going on it, it's fun and I love it. And that last sentence is probably the easiest, but that first one, you're just kind of like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
here I go.
And I find that that first page is what you revise the most too.
It is. It is definitely.
Yeah, because it has to be so catchy and draw your reader in
Mhm.
and get
Yeah,
everybody's attention and have all the details and all of those things.
exactly. And how many times have we all thought we knew where the book began, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, that's not the beginning.
Right,
So, yeah.
exactly. Well, this has been great, Kathleen. Where can
Thank you.
readers find your books?
So they're available any major retailer, independent bookstores. I love indie stores, so please support your indie store. They can order them in if they don't have them on stock. My website is kathleendonnelly.com. You can, all the buy links that are up on the website for all the books. You can also sign up for my newsletter there. It's just a monthly newsletter. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you can download a free little ebook with short stories called Working Tales, the stories behind the canines. And they're just little short stories from my time working the dogs. So
Oh, that's fun. Oh, well, it's been really great talking to you. Thanks so much, Kathleen.
thank you. It's been wonderful talking with you too. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.